Hmm. Hello there, you lucky devils. Just a little Everclear to get the old heart started before showtime. Maybe I should play the theme for a change.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
You're in violation of secure communication procedures, Commodore.
So we just went ahead and fixed the glitch.
There is no America. There is no democracy.
Our fifth objective, a new world order.
There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West.
Right-wing conspiracy.
What do you call it when the assassins accuse the assassin?
A new world order.
Thank you for plugging in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
Well, just a second there, Professor. We fixed the glitch.
I'm your host, Professor Thomas Henry Horan.
He reads everything.
Hello there, you lucky devils. You better bet your bippies he reads everything. In tonight's free episode, I will do some free Zodiac episodes. I was on Drew Hurst Beeson's Zodcast last night. Check that out. Do I still have that link? I'll get right to the... So what I'm going to do is tease you about tomorrow, Wednesday night's episode. I don't want you to miss the debate. So Wednesday night I will do a premium Zodiac episode, some evidence you have never seen that prove once and for all those letters could not have been written by the killer. Could only have been written by someone who had access to the police files, autopsy reports, things like that I'll be showing you. That's the only person who could have written those letters. There's no way the killer could have known things that were in those reports that show up in the letters. So tonight, what I want to talk about is all this brouhaha about Richard Hoffman. What was I Googling? His grandson. Oh, my grandfather was the Zodiac. Now, there are reasons why those of us on the interwebs have talked about Hoffman as a possible suspect. And I'm going to go into some of those reasons right now. What was I Googling? Oh, Drew's channel. Actually, I just look at my subscriptions. They're there. So we had about a 2.5 hour talk last night about all the things that you people don't know about Zodiac. Not just that you don't know anything about Zodiac, you never did. But the things that I have never talked about or hinted around, I may have hinted around about, but even things I never even hinted around about. Sorry, I went to Scooter's Coffee this morning and they accidentally gave me caffeine instead of decaffeinated. Here's the episode right here. Here's the episode right here. Sure. Copy. And then we're going to do a lot more episodes together. There's the link right there in the chat. He knows stuff I don't know. He knows all this stuff about Don Chaney and Paul Avery. Paul Avery's dad, Paul Avery's stepdad. Check out that episode. Drew barely got a word in edgewise, and if you're not impressed by that, you don't need to be plugged into the Stones Unturned podcast. So watch his channel anyway. My God. He has cracked D.B. Cooper the way I have cracked Madeline McCann. Like, there's no doubt. He has he explains the whole thing. I think it took him like 20 minutes. It was like the most amazing video, but he's done other videos since then. But he needs to be on TV more. That's for sure. So, yeah, we had a great chat last night. Let me just get right to it. Some of the reasons why Hoffman makes such a good Zodiac suspect. Now, as you know from reading my book, and if you haven't read my book, the answers to your questions are in this book. The video's reversed so that when I look at my other monitor, it doesn't look like I'm looking off into space. Myth of the Zodiac Killer. There should be links in the description of this video, right? Can I change this stuff now? No, I cannot. Should be in the description to the video. I should be able to see it from here. The first thing you have to understand is crap, the links are not there. To buy the book, because I'm not going to turn the book into videos. Maybe paid videos, but not free ones. But tonight I will show you some things that are not in the book. And the next premium episode, the premium episode's coming up. The book is like chapter 1. The documentary series on NBC they did for Peacock and for Oxygen and so forth. And more grateful I could not be. Marvelous people, marvelous, only took 12 years. They were the last ones to hammer on this project. So, that's like chapter 2. Now, the next couple hundred chapters you'll see right here on this YouTube channel, the members only. It's $10 a month, $9.99 a month. Okay? Those of you who have been subscribing to the premium website, you won't miss anything, but that website's going to wind down in December. So you'll need to, but you'll be covered. All premium episodes will be mirrored on both sites. Here's this link. If you want to see the episodes like Madeleine McCann and JonBenet Ramsey that I cannot put on ScrewTube, then you need to subscribe to that site. But other than that, I'm currently uploading. Tomorrow I will upload I'll rerun one of the premium website episodes on Jim and Darlene. There's like 13 episodes in that series. No, 13 episodes in the phony kidnapping in the Lindbergh baby. I'm uploading those to the premium YouTube. And the episodes about Jim and Darlene. I'll upload the next episode about Jim and Darlene tomorrow, early. And then you can watch a debate. And then Wednesday, I will do a live stream to both channels. Premium live stream on more Zodiac proof that there is no way the killer wrote those letters. So, this will be just the first episode in that type of a series. Okay? So, without further ado, what am I talking about? You have to understand the Zodiac case does not begin with Sherry Jo Bates. It does not begin with Dominguez Edwards. It does not begin with Lake Herman Road, David Faraday, and Betty Lou Jensen. The Zodiac case begins with the letters which were mailed to the newspapers. The police had made no connection between these murders whatsoever. So the Zodiac case begins. Usually a case begins, I don't like to go into a case without the original police reports. But with Lindbergh, it wasn't necessary. Because the answer is always there. It's like Madeleine McCann. The answer is right there, and it led directly to Madeleine. So in this case, the Zodiac case, we have the police reports. And they tell a totally different story, and they tell us that the letters were a hoax, and they tell us all this other stuff. Then it gets weird after that. But that case does not begin with the first police report from Lake Herman Road or whatever. When I say first, the first report to get typed and put in the file, that's where the case begins. A modern case would begin, 911 operator, blah, 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 received a call from a person identifying themselves as Patsy Ramsey. This person stated that her daughter was missing and a ransom note had been found. Please hurry. That would be the beginning of the case. The beginning of the Zodiac case is actually when the letters are mailed. This is long after the murders supposedly start happening. Well, the murders are real. Who committed the murders, that's a different story. So, the Zodiac case, those murder cases begin when those reports, like for Blue Rock Springs Park, Jim and Darlene and Mike, the first report typed was Richard Hoffman. He's the only cop who typed his report that night before he went home. The rest of that was early morning hours, July 5th. The other officers do not type their reports until the afternoon of the 8th, when they're on their way out the door to go on strike. It matters when reports are typed, and you will see why when you read this book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. It matters a lot. So that's when that case begins. But the Zodiac case begins when these 3 letters are received. It's 3 copies of the same letter, not Xerox. They're handwritten letters, and it's the same text, and each one has a piece of a bizarre cryptogram, and they're mailed to the Chronicle, the Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, the 3 biggest papers in the Bay Area. On Friday, August 1st, they all receive their copy of the letter with their section of the cipher. No newspaper gets the whole cipher. Oh, hi, Baby Bull. Oh, I forgot about Rogers. Yeah. No spoilers. Oh, go ahead and give me spoilers. Just make sure they're true. So, what does that mean? To understand this, and to understand Hoffman's role, and why Hoffman is a suspect, we have to look at the very first newspaper article. The case against Hoffman is based mainly on Hoffman's own report. He's the chump who typed his reports before everybody sat down and got their story straight. He typed his report and went home. He hung himself with that report pretty thoroughly. That doesn't mean he's guilty. Complicit? Oh, yeah. Guilty? I don't think he pulled the trigger. I think he's the car that pulled in and left. Then the killer pulled in and bang, bang, bang. But, and this ties in with the hoax. It's not a theory. It's a fact, as you will see. Okay? Start with this book, but you got to read this book. I'm going to assume all stupid questions are answered in this book. If not stupid questions, but when you ask questions that prove to me that you haven't read the book, the answer is going to be the answer to your question is in this book, and I'm not kidding. It took me years to write it. You can take a few years to read it. But I will illustrate points from the book on the premium YouTube channel. Don't worry about that. But there's so much stuff that no one has ever seen. I'm the only person who's ever seen it all. People contributed chunks, big chunks, but no one's seen it all but me. And now you're about to see it all. It'll take a while. It'll take a long time. It's going to take years to get through this case. So this article appeared in the Sunday, July 6, 1969 edition of the San Francisco Chronicle. There is no byline. Woman slain, friend is shot. Vallejo. A young woman was shot to death and a young man companion wounded by a mysterious gunman early yesterday, moments after they pulled their car into Blue Rock Springs Park. That is not true. They've been sitting there for over 15 minutes, according to Mike. But this is where the myth begins. They pull into the parking lot and bang, bang, bang. Nothing could be further from the truth. Several other cars came and went while they were sitting there, including probably Richard Hoffman, as we will see in a minute. All of this information comes from Hoffman's report, except for one thing. Mageau was able to tell police only that the car door was torn open shortly after they had parked. As I talked about on Drew's show last night, and I will talk about again, and talked about in great detail in the book, the killer opened the door. As far as the cops knew, the killer opened the door. Not Mike Mageau. Those were not his fingerprints on the door handle. He did not open the door. Vallejo didn't need to send his prints to FBI. Vallejo had his prints on file locally. He was already a convicted juvenile offender on probation, informing for the cops. Why would he get shot by drug dealers? Because they all know he's informing for the cops. And Hoffman is one of the Vallejo Police Department juvenile narcotics undercover officers. We're going to get to his report in just a second. What you need to know right now, and you can read the full analysis of this in this book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, by me, Professor Thomas Henry Horan, is that this article is based on Hoffman's report. This reporter somehow got a copy of Hoffman's report. Maybe Hoffman called him up and filled him in. That's possible. It would have been too late for the Saturday morning edition of the Chronicle, July 5th, but it would have got in the Sunday morning edition. Maybe Hoffman called him and filled him in. I didn't see any other stories that Hoffman had ever called the San Francisco Chronicle with. but maybe this one. More likely, the reporter at the Times Herald, Dave Peterson, got a copy of Hoffman's report, and to score brownie points, the Vallejo Times Herald didn't publish a Sunday edition, so he would call his buddy at the Chronicle and have it slipped into the Chronicle. And, they do each other favors. You know how it works. There's nothing mysterious about any of that. All of this comes from Hoffman's report, except the part about Hoffman doesn't put anything in his report about Mageau was able to tell police only that the car door was torn open shortly after they parked. The passenger door was open and Mike was laying on the parking lot. As we shall see in subsequent episodes, there's this huge effort made to prove that Mike was sitting in the front seat when the shooting started. Why would Zodiac spend page after page proving Mike was in the front seat? What's he afraid of? Is he afraid police are going to figure out that Mike was in the back seat the whole time? Mike was not sitting in the front seat when the shooting started? When they arrived at Blue Rock Springs Park, Mike was already in the back seat. That's because somebody else was sitting in the front seat. That's one possible explanation. But Mike was not the last person to open that car door. Somebody else was. And read the book. You don't know anything about this case. All you know is Graysmith's myth, which has now confused people for 40 years. Okay? Hoffman's report is the basis for this article. Period. It's important to know that. Later on, I will prove that the Zodiac also had a copy of Hoffman's reports. But that's not what makes Hoffman look guilty. Because the letters were a hoax. Don't forget that. But I'll prove that as we go along. I already proved it in this book, but there's 10 times. Not just that it's a hoax, but who did it and why. This is way more interesting than some boring serial killer case. This is Nancy Slover's report. She did not type this report till July 8th. She did not keep any handwritten reports as a dispatcher. She did this from memory July 8th, the morning of July 8th, after all these newspaper stories have already been published. But according to her report, at July 5th, 1969, at 12:10 a.m., writer Nancy Slover received a call from female citizen stating that 2 juveniles were being shot at Blue Rock Springs parking lot. No, that's not what she said. But it's possible that Nancy didn't remember exactly what was said. But the funny thing is, there's a reason why Vallejo Police Department wants to start twisting this story to make it sound like the shooting was taking place. The shooting was in progress at approximately 12:10 a.m. There's a reason why everybody wants to lie about that. And when they typed their reports on July 8th, every single cop in Vallejo PD typed this transcript and this note about this phone call into their reports to make sure it got into everybody's report. Why would everybody want to? Maybe they didn't know they were lying, but somebody's trying to cover something up. What is it? 12:40 a.m., writer received a call. We'll talk about the prank phone calls in another episode. The kids who called the police, Deborah, Roger, and Jerry, arrived at Blue Rock Springs parking lot a few minutes before midnight. Both boys guessed the time they were at the park as real close to midnight, possibly a little before midnight. According to the witness, George Bryant, his dad was the park caretaker. They lived in a house on the park grounds. He said he heard the gunshots at about 12:55 to 12:57, that time period, a few minutes before midnight. Everybody agrees. Mike said the shooting took place a few minutes before midnight. Everybody agrees the shooting took place between 12:55 and between 11:55 and 12 o'clock. There is no doubt about that. They then proceeded into Vallejo and went to 938 Castlewood, Jerry's house, and called police to report what they had seen. It's a 10-minute drive, no matter how fast you go. It is a 10-minute drive from Blue Rock Springs Park to Jerry's house in Castlewood, and run in the door and pick up the phone and call. According to the statement they gave to the police, they debated amongst themselves whether they should call the police, because they were afraid they were going to get into trouble because they were going to that park to buy drugs. So they didn't know for sure whether they should call the police or not. So they debated for about a minute. They called the police. The phone rings at police headquarters at 12:10 a.m. The shooting took place at 11:57-ish. They arrived at Blue Rock Springs Park 11:58ish. They talked to Mike at 11:59ish. They drive back to Castlewood. They call the police at 12:10ish. There just isn't any doubt about that. There's too much corroboration going all different ways. The first thing people told police was that the shooting took place around 11:55, and the first phone call to police took place at 12:10. Days later, stories are going to start changing in Vallejo police reports, where it sounds like the shooting is taking place at 12:10. Now, here's Hoffman's report. 12:10 a.m., 7569. Writer copied it, and see, he makes all these funny spelling mistakes, which we're going to talk about later. Copied a radio message from dispatcher regarding 2 teenagers being shot at in the area of Blue Rock Springs Park. Reporting officer had just checked this area approximately 15 minutes prior to this transmission. You mean 11:55? 11:55ish, you already drove through the park? I'm going to go into Mike's statement later, and I go into all of this in great detail in the book. But Mike says that the shooting took place around 11:55, and they'd been sitting in. Darlene picked him up between 11:30 and 11:35. They started driving to Mr. Ed's. They turned around and drove to Blue Rock Springs Park, which would be about a 10 to 15 minute drive. So let's say they arrive at Blue Rock Springs Park at 12:45. And Mike said they'd been sitting there about 10, maybe 15 minutes when the shooter pulled up and started shooting. And then a minute or two later, very quickly after that, as soon as Mike gets out of the car and hits the ground, the next thing you know, here comes this van with Deborah, Roger, and Jerry. So that's how tight the time window is. Because several other cars pulled into the lot and pulled out. Not just mysterious cars. There's a car with kids or pickup truck setting off firecrackers. It's the 4th of July, for Christ's sake, and it's midnight. This is not a lover's lane. This is a party spot. I'm sure some loving went on, but it's not a secluded, spooky lover's lane. It's a party spot, and this is Friday night, the 4th of July. And the 18-year-olds just got out of high school, and they're allowed to drink. Well, maybe not in California. What was the drinking age in California? Check this area 15 minutes prior to this transmission. And okay, approximately 15 minutes. Okay, how about 30 minutes? You're a cop. Is this how carefully you keep track of your time? Who are you, Dr. Werner Spitz? But, you know, he's a rookie. Well, he's been on the force about a year. I'll come back to the Andy thing in a minute. Detective Rust spoke to, while searching the surrounding scene, reporting officer was contacted, that would be Rust, contacted by Deputy Ben Villarreal of the sheriff's office, who stated he had been by the area of the shooting just before midnight and did not observe the brown Corvair there at this time. There was a blue 67 Ford sedan in the lot near where the Corvair is now. That was Hoffman's car. He drove by and saw Hoffman in the parking lot. Hoffman found the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs clear of people or motor vehicles. Wow! Were you blindfolded? Were you in a coma? Because there are cars in and out of that parking lot that whole 15-minute period, including but not limited to a plain car that acted like a cop car, and then right after that, the shooter's car. You must have passed the shooter's car because he pulled out of Blue Rock Springs Park and drove on towards town. He didn't go west towards the new junior college and the fire station. He came from that way and went east, and the killer came from that direction. The killer came from the same direction Hoffman had just left by. Because Mike describes that. Mike describes Hoffman pulling in behind them. They think it's a cop. They're getting their IDs out. Darlene says, don't worry about it, because she knows it's Hoffman. And Hoffman leaves because the guys that they were supposed to meet and get busted hadn't shown up yet because Hoffman blew it. Because Hoffman can't keep track. Hoffman doesn't know what fucking time it is. He got there too early. Accidentally? We'll never know. Ben Villarreal is notorious for being a one-man. People said he was a one-man police department on his own. Nobody messed with Ben Villarreal. He was the head of the narcotics squad, and you know how that goes. Only the most honest cops work narcotics permanently. Please don't tell him I said that. He's only 83 years old and he's still badass. He was a badass. I think he was a Marine, Korea or something. Villarreal stated he'd been sent on another call and had to leave the scene without checking the occupants of the blue Ford. See, it's against the law to be parking in the park after dark, even on the 4th of July. Hoffman claims he didn't even see Darlene's car, let alone admit that he failed to roust him. Villarreal admits he sees a car in Blue Rock Springs Park, but he received a call to proceed somewhere else. Boy, that was lucky. But they're both on the it's Napa. It's definitely Solano County and VPD have a joint narcotics task force, and both of them are on it. They've been staking out John Doe Watt's house for 6 months. What are they doing at Blue Rock Springs Park? Both of them at the same time. Why did Ben Villarreal think that he would see... What did he think was going on when he got a call to go somewhere else? What do you mean you got a call to go somewhere else? I don't understand something. Why didn't Richard Hoffman get a call to go somewhere else? They're working together. Hoffman claims he had a radio in his unmarked car working as a juvenile undercover narcotics officer. What are you doing with the police radio in your car? Hey, Dick, nice police radio. You're not a cop, are you? No. Don't even bother answering that question. But if he didn't have a radio in his car, how did he hear the dispatch at 12:10? Because he typed his report at about 5:30 in the morning. Villarreal stated he would submit a complete report on what he had observed to the VPD, but he never did. It's not in the files. But narcotics is always undercover. No questions asked. Regular cops just walk away usually. That's what happened in the Manson. That's what happens. That's standard operating procedure. So Hoffman was there in his unmarked car. He claims he didn't see Darlene's car there, but Darlene's car had been there for at least 10 minutes when he said he pulled in there. And Villarreal confirms that's the time he was there. That's the car that was there, and then Mike said the car pulled in. They thought it might have been a cop in a plane car, and Darlene said, don't worry about it, and then after a minute the guy leaves, and less than a minute later the killer shows up and bang, bang, bang. Just a coincidence. This is what makes Hoffman look so suspicious, because it sounds like Hoffman was the shooter, and he pressured Mike into telling the cops that there were two cars. And that's possible. But this is one of the things that looks super duper suspicious. Hoffman puts himself, and Villarreal corroborates his story. It's almost like they sat down and got their story straight. But this is the night of the shooting. So I don't think they sat down and got their story straight. Unless they did. Unless they wanted to try to make it sound like they had checked that area 15 minutes before, because they thought the shooting was in progress at 12:10. And they wanted to cover their asses. And accidentally put both of themselves, and Villarreal corroborated Hoffman being there at the moment of the shooting. You had to pass the shooter. One of you had to pass the shooter on the road. So what's going on? This is one of the things that makes Hoffman look so suspicious. And Villarreal is not off the hook either. At Lake Herman Road, if the killer, whatever car it was that James Owen saw at the crime scene, and he heard gunshots as soon as he drove past, if that's the killer, where did his car go? Because he didn't go back towards Vallejo because Stella Borges would have seen him. And he didn't go on the way to Benicia because there was a guy coming the other way that would have seen him. So where'd he go? The only place he could go was either straight up, or he went down that dirt road that was secured by that locked gate that only cops know the combinations to. And there's like 10 locks on it. It's not like one combination lock. There's like 10 locks. Well, if you drive down that dirt road that goes past that refinery and goes past the pump station that's right there, the water pumping station to transmit fresh water. If you go down that dirt road and come to the other highway that goes to Benicia, past the refinery and all that stuff, at that intersection on one of those corners, that's Ben Villarreal's house. It's last time I checked, it's still Ben Villarreal's house. And Ben Villarreal is the one. Ben Villarreal actually arrested and booked a suspect for the murder of Darlene Ferrin that you never heard of because you never bothered to read these reports. All these years, Robert Graysmith, Tom Voight, Butterfingers, not one of these people has ever mentioned that a suspect was arrested and booked for the murder of Darlene Ferrin, and he probably had the murder weapon in his pocket because what he had was a defective 9mm. It wasn't a Browning. I think it was a. Was it a Parabellum? I don't know if it was a Luger Parabellum. It's a P38. He had a Walter P38. And it had been dropped, and the clip that holds the magazine inside the butt, the handle, had broken off. He said they had to duct tape the clip inside the butt of the pistol, and it would jam. Just like what happened in Baroque Springs Park. He starts to shoot, the shooting stops, he walks back to the car, getting in the light, tick, 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 comes back, bang, 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 bang. But he didn't shoot her. He doesn't match the description. He was set up to get arrested with that pistol in his pocket. He's the same guy who's in the reports. They talk about who had bought Graysmith talks about this. Graysmith talks about him, this suspicious person, buying a box of 9mm ammo that the cops talked to, but Graysmith never mentions that that guy got arrested the night of July 20th and was booked for Darlene's murder. They sent the pistol off for ballistics comparison. We have a copy of that report. No one can find a copy of the results of that report. I wonder why that is. Only 2 files are missing from Vallejo's that I can identify. Well, 3. One of them is Villarreal's report. One of them is a complete report of detectives talking to Darlene's parents. And the third one is the results of that ballistics check. Where is it? Why is it a secret? Because it would have come back a day or two before the first Zodiac letter was mailed. Was Zodiac waiting to see if this guy, Don, were they waiting to see, was Zodiac waiting to see if he was guilty before he decided to take credit for Darlene's murder? But they reduced the charges. They didn't get the ballistics report back in time to prove that was the murder weapon. So they had to reduce the charges to carrying a concealed weapon. And by the way, he had an Ivor Johnson in his underwear. He had an Ivor Johnson .32 revolver in his underpants. There's a lot more to that guy. I will do a premium episode. I've talked to him. I've had a long talk with him. He's not the shooter. He wasn't the shooter. You know Angel, but he wasn't a hard criminal. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't he's a truck driver. Became a truck driver. He was staying with his grandmother and was working, trying to get his time built up so he could get his union card as a welder at Mare Island, and fell in with a bad crowd, he said. It's never their fault. Fell in with a bad crowd, got in trouble, got busted for this. He was obviously set up. He told me a much fuller story. They went to Willie's house. He remembered the guy's name was Willie. He remembered this story. And guess who arrested him? Ben Villarreal. And it just seems like the purpose of this arrest is to try to close the Darlene Ferrin case. And it just seems like the Zodiac was waiting to find out whether Don was guilty or not before he wrote that letter. Because if Don was guilty, that would prove that how could Don write the Zodiac letters when he's sitting in jail? But anyway, that's a future episode. What makes Hoffman look guilty? Well, the next thing that happens is he's on his way to Blue Rock Springs Park from the east side of town. He falls in behind Mayring and Lindemann, who are about a half a mile in front of him. All of a sudden, they whip it over. It's a boulevard. There's a median strip. So they whip it over, and they pull over this gray Cadillac, late model gray, well, about 5-year-old gray Cadillac. So this is Officer Mayring's report, typed July 8th. Officers report receiving a call from dispatch, 2 persons shot at in the Blue Rock Springs area. Upon arrival at Blue Rock Springs Golf Course Clubhouse, reporting officer observed a vehicle traveling south on Columbus Parkway at approximately 20 miles per hour. For a teenager on a Friday night on the 4th of July, that's slowly and quietly. As reporting officer made a U-turn at same location, vehicle stopped and backed up to parking area west side of roadway. He knew the cops were going to pull him over. He didn't try to run. As officers approached, white male emerged from behind the wheel and approached officers, asked for ID. Andrew Nickolatos Jr., 19 years old. As sub was removing, is this about that guy laying down back there? How'd you guess, son? So this was the second one. Mike said something about a car came and he tried to get him to come over and they wouldn't come over. This was after Deborah, Roger, and Jerry left. Like a minute after Deborah. Well, no, this is at 12. So he arrives. Okay. Their full story is they pull in the parking lot. They see Mike all bloody leaning up against the car. They don't talk to him. They start pulling out and they're leaving slowly and quietly. They're not on their way. They're not racing to a payphone to call for help. That's obvious. And there's more about Andy I'll tell you about in a minute. But no murder weapon in his car, no murder weapon in the parking. So Andy's not the shooter. But police did detain a suspect leaving the scene of the crime. When they think the crime is taking place at 12:09 to 12:10, they stop a car leaving the scene of the crime at 12:10, 12:11, but he's not the shooter. Did they try to change their story to make the time of the shooting 12:10-ish to make Andy look guilty? Because the funny thing is, one of the Zodiac letters I'll get to in a minute. But let me get back to, and I'm going to go into more detail about that in Wednesday's episode. And it's a great detail in the book. But I'm going to show you things that are not in the book. The book is limited to the materials that Robert Graysmith had access to, okay? Hoffman's report, 12:10 a.m. Copied a radio message from dispatch. Checked the parking lot approximately 15 minutes prior to this transmission. Proceeding to the above area, he observed. At this time, the police unit stopped a late model gray Cadillac that was proceeding towards Vallejo. That's south on Colum. It makes a turn at the golf course. It makes a turn from going east and west. It turns south and it's a parkway, goes around the city. Make a U-turn. Observed Unit 119 make a U-turn on Columbus Parkway just south of the golf course. At this time, police unit stopped a late model gray Cadillac. As the driver got out of this Cadillac, he was recognized by Ryder, spelled with 2 T's, Hoffman, as Andy Nickolatos, white male adult, 19 years. Reporting officer then proceeded to Blue Rock Springs parking lot, thus being the first to arrive. This Ritter was right. I'll come back to this. I'm not saying he makes a good suspect. I'm just saying he makes himself look guilty as hell. But that's partly because he typed his report before everybody else typed theirs. Found 7 empty shell casings. Right. This is where the Chronicle story comes from, is straight from Hoffman's report, except Hoffman doesn't mention anything about Mike saying that the killer opened the door. Dave Peterson claimed he was in the parking lot when Hoffman and Conway were questioning Mike. No, well, you know what? When Conway arrives, Hoffman tells him to go back and make sure Lindemann and Mayring hold on to Andy, and to call for an ambulance because Hoffman says he doesn't have a radio in his car. Well, if Hoffman doesn't have a radio in his car, then how did he hear the dispatch at 12:10? What was Hoffman doing on his going back to Blue Rock Springs Park? He just left there. 15-minute, routine patrol. He's on his way back. It's the 4th of July. It's Friday night, baby. There's party, party, party. Tricky Dick Hoffman has already left the building. Smoke 'em if you got 'em, kids. So he goes back. You want to bust some kids? Or he's going back to check and see if Darlene's contact has arrived yet or not. Are you with me? And radio units are already proceeding to the scene. Cherries rolling. He then accompanies the victims to the hospital. Now, here's my question. You're an undercover, the new hires, the new rookie cops, your first job is juvenile, and if you're a guy in particular, a young guy, your first job is undercover juvenile narcotics. Fair enough. That explains why he doesn't have a radio in his personal 67 Blue Ford that he'd be getting mileage reimbursement for. I don't think he's making full-time, he might not be making full-time money, but he's been doing it for a while. I know he is making full-time money. He is a full-time employee of the police department. I forgot. So he's doing this. Well, it's bad luck for undercover cops to hang around black and whites with their cherries rolling. It's bad luck for undercover cops to accompany juvenile delinquent shooting victims. Andy had a record. That's how Hoffman knew him. Accompanying them to the hospital and filling out police reports. It's bad luck for undercover cops to hang out with fucking cops. Who doesn't understand this? What's he doing hanging around the crime scene at all? I understand that when he gets there and he recognizes the victims and he says, I was never here. When Conway arrives, he said, I'll see you later. I'm going to go back and I got to go back and talk to that kid. He's a juvie. He's one of my juvie cases. But he sends Conway back and he stays with the victims because, as we shall see, it's blatantly obvious that Darlene and Mike were tangled up in some undercover narking. There's no doubt about that. That's probably what got them shot. And it sure would have looked convincing enough, okay? That's not the point tonight. This is what makes Hoffman look guilty. Here's an interesting coincidence. Andy Nickolatos Jr. had been shot himself a few months earlier. This was November 68. This is a month before David and Betty Lure shot. Andy Jr. had been shot. Law enforcement officers today were still searching for suspects in the shooting of an 18-year-old Vallejo youth Monday night in a psychedelic art gallery. Is that what they called him in 1969? In 2024, in the Lou, we call them trap houses. A psychedelic art gallery. Blacklight posters, low-grade seeds, 3-2 beer, and a lot of incels. Was shot in the upper chest by one of two Negro youths who entered the workshop gallery. Oh, okay, I thought it was by two Negro youths who entered the workshop gallery and fired a .32 caliber revolver. That's not the same .32 caliber revolver that Don had in his underwear, is it? That'd be quite a coincidence if he had the Darlene Ferrin murder weapon and the Andy Nickolatos Jr. shooting weapon. I only mention that because Andy Nickolatos Jr. was by far the most obvious suspect when police arrived at the scene. He's not guilty, but he was shot with a .32. And Don had the P38 and A32 in his good and plenties. I think it was a .32. I will have to double check that. Don't take that to the bank yet. I'm sitting here thinking 25 or 32. 32 or 25. It was a small Ivor Johnson revolver. So I'm thinking, first I was like, he was shot by two Negro youths? What, was he caught in the crossfire? where they like this, cheek to cheek. We'll go shooting cheek to cheek. Was it Bonita and Clyde? Okay. Witnesses said the assailant entered the gallery 15 minutes before the shooting. Well, here we go again. First, you'll hear Big Ben go, ding dong, 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 ding dong. Then, at the quarter hour, you'll hear ding dong, ding dong, and then you'll hear nothing else. When you hear that sound, pull out your guns and fire all of your guns at once and explode into space. At the Psychedelic Art Gallery, baby. That's about how long it takes a hit of window pane to hit, as they say. None of the witnesses could identify the assailant. Then how do you know he was black? I mean, come on. Remember that time Gary Hinman he wasn't pulled over by the cops. He was camped on the side of the interstate and a cop drove past him and several hours later came back? And he said he bought the car off of two Negroes down in Watts. The bullet passed cleanly through his chest. That's a pretty serious wound. A perforation wound through the chest is a very serious wound. But fortunately, by July 4th, he's up and about and on the dating scene again, girls. Chicks dig scars, baby. What's the matter, Andy? I got shot. I stepped to and he shot me. What a case. What a case. What an amazing case. What an amazing thing for Robert Graysmith not to know about the Zodiac case. That there was a suspect who... Here's the thing. I'm going to go into more detail, and I go into detail in the book. It goes like this. According to Graysmith, police reports did verify that the Zodiac letters had to have been written by the killer. Or, I think he would admit, okay, either the killer or a cop. I think he would go that far. Only somebody with that kind of information. So, there's a suspect who's arrested leaving the scene Graysmith never heard of. There's a suspect who's arrested and booked and is in possession of not only the 9mm, but possibly the gun that shot Andy. Graysmith never heard of this. And it's all in the reports that he plagiarizes, but then he'll change one word, and it's crucial. Read this book. Read this book. But the only reason I mention that is, a few months before that, in April of 1968, Richard Hoffman got shot. And by the way, he was 30 years old in 1968. What kind of juvenile narcotics are you working? You sure you're not working pederast narcotics? Is that the kind of juvenile narcotics you're working? Are you working the working boys and girls? Are you really working vice? What would Mike Mageau do for a Klondike bar? He was dressed as a burglar. Why are you wearing 3 layers of clothes, Mike? It's a hot night. It was a very hot night in Vallejo. It can get hot in Vallejo, and it can be hot. Like, I lived near the river in Sacramento, and the temperature would drop before the sun went down. But in Vallejo, man, I've been over there at midnight, and it's like 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 layers of clothes, Mike? Because when he gets seen climbing out of a window with a radio, he runs around the corner, takes off 1 layer of clothes, and his description has completely changed. This is standard operating procedure for your little cat burglars. And there's a known cold-blooded killer who is notorious, and he has a cousin in the Hells Angels, and he trades drugs for boosted goods. Not a cash fence, it's a barter. That's what Mike was going there to Blue Rock Springs for. He'd been burglaring houses while everybody was down at the marina watching the boat parade and the fireworks show. Now it's midnight. Now it's time to meet the man and trade one bag for another. And Leo has admitted over the years that Darlene was at Blue Rock Springs Park buying some party supplies. Not buying weight, just getting a bag of this and a bag of that and have a little party for the 4th of July. But it's obvious that whoever was supposed to meet her there and meet Mike there, it's obvious they showed up all right, and they noticed that Hoffman had been there and took care of business. That's one very simple explanation for what happened. Hoffman just simply fucked up. And Villarreal corroborated his story. And then Vallejo police see when an informant gets killed in the line of duty, the police department is liable. That, I believe, was still true. Eventually, this was true. An informant that gets killed or an injured in the line of duty can sue the police department. That's why they begin to lie about this case. One of the things the Zodiac letters actually tells us is he picks on things where these cops in these local police departments are covering things up, and he points directly to them. By pointing directly to Hoffman's report, he's not necessarily framing Hoffman for being the killer or the writer of the Zodiac letters. He's just calling attention to Hoffman's report. He's also covering his own ass. He will be able to prove in court when he's put on trial for first-degree murder. Oh, those letters, I had access to those police reports. That's how I wrote the letters. See, this is how I wrote the letters. We'll talk about that later. 3 Vallejo police officers were shot Sunday night as a suspected hit-and-run driver allegedly grabbed a gun from another officer at the scene and fired 6 shots, all hitting the policeman. What kind of town is this? Graysmith paints this as a town of this sleepy industrial suburb. That wasn't Hoffman's gun. He grabbed the gun from an officer he didn't shoot. Well, that's smart. You don't got to shoot that guy. He ain't got a gun no more. Shoot the guys who still have guns. And apparently he's a pretty good shot. And apparently he's pretty cool under fire. For a hit-and-run driver, that usually indicates intoxication, panic, that kind of thing. Well, his reflexes were still sharp, razor sharp. Whew. Number one, how could a serial killer get a victim in edgewise in this town? Number two, how did he stay alive? How did he survive the cross? This is the Zodiac speaking. I need a medevac. Roger Edward Gully and George Herman Wiley of Vallejo were taken to county jail for further investigation pending charges. Wiley, who was the driver of the suspected hit-and-run car, also was identified as having fired the shots. They're not the same 2 Negroes, are they? Are they 2 Negroes? They've arrested the suspect, so they don't have to mention their race as part of the description. Shackelford was released Sunday night after treatment for 3 wounds in his lower leg. Mike was shot in his lower leg, not his knee. He was not shot in the knee. Hoffman's report said he was shot in the lower leg. He was actually shot in the thigh. He wasn't shot in the knee or the lower leg. He was shot in the thigh. But Hoffman saw the blood coming down and looked like he'd been shot in the lower leg. His partner Shackelford, whatever, had been shot in the lower leg. Banks was hit twice in the lower part of the body. You mean the abdomen? One thing I learned about trying to do newspaper writing was you got to be as concise as possible. Or as my editor liked to say when he was slapping me around the office, be concise. Hoffman was released after removal of a bullet from his shoulder. Mike was hit in the shoulder, the lower leg, the chest. And Darlene, I don't think there's a connection there, but the incident started after the suspected car was spotted in a Sage Street driveway. One officer said it appeared why they had agreed to return to the scene of the accident when a mob gathered. Rocks were thrown and one officer was knocked to the ground. This doesn't sound like the white part of town. At the same time, the revolver was somehow taken from another officer at the scene. Somehow? Was it telekinesis? You know how cunning these drunks can be. The crowd dispersed when Officer Charles Ector fired several warning shots into the air. Where did they come down? This is not the sleepy little industrial suburb that Graysmith paints. And methamphetamine brought in by the Hells Angels beginning in 1968. You got the murder of Ronald Lee Roy and all these people. Well, I think it begins in 1967. And the whole town starts bouncing off the walls like a box full of BBs. Bodies are dropping everywhere, and it's all meth related. Methamphetamine, as the Nazis proved, is the number one facilitator for violence. The guys who were on trial for shooting all those gas station clerks had no rational explanation why they'd been rolling on meth. They got all spun out and just started shooting people. They themselves couldn't really explain it. And it just hit Vallejo like a bomb. Vallejo had been there had been some juvenile delinquencies all industrial towns had after the war, but none of this is mentioned by Graysmith. And on the way to the scene of a shooting of two adolescents at Blue Rock Springs Park, two previous shooting victims, Officer Hoffman and Andy Nickolatos Jr., just happened to be, well, let me put it this way. After the killer leaves the scene, Deborah, Roger, and Jerry are the next to arrive. They go call the police. Andy Nickolatos Jr. is the next to arrive at the scene. See, it's not that Hoffman's the first to arrive. It's not that Meyering and Linderman are the first to arrive. The first to arrive are Deborah, Roger, and Jerry. The next to arrive is Andy. As he's leaving, Hoffman arrives. Then a cop arrives, Conway. See, you have to slow down. You have to read every sentence and really absorb what it means. Police reports, especially in the old days, were concise at best, if legible. This is a very, very busy parking lot. Mike and Darlene arrive. A pickup truck arrives. Kids setting off fireworks. And a couple other cars arrive. Then Hoffman arrives. Then the shooter arrives. This all happens in less than 15 minutes. Then Deborah, Roger, and Jerry arrive. Then Andy arrives. Then Hoffman arrives. In 30 minutes, how many cars is that we know of that are in and out of that parking lot? How did the Zodiac, driving on the freeways around St. Louis, there was this, I think it was one particular really big red-tailed hawk, a really big one, an old one, a smart one, been around a long time. And the cars are zipping by, and I'm going down the freeway, and I see this jackrabbit, or this rabbit, running up and down the retaining wall on the inside, where he can't get out. And in between this traffic, in swoops this hawk and nails that rabbit and flies off and flew in between all of those cars. Had that plotted out perfectly. It seems like not only did Zodiac have it plotted out perfectly, but Hoffman managed to leave and get off of Blue Rock Springs, get off of Columbus Parkway before the killer got on it, and then drove into the parking lot. This is some very tight timing here. Those last 5 minutes of Darlene's life were very, very busy. From 12:55. From 11:55 to 11:59, Darlene's life was a whirlwind. And in between there, a serial killer snuck in and shot her. This... What an amazing... Without being seen, without his car being seen. Oh, Boeing could have used you, Zodiac. Somebody with that kind of precise timing. I mean, holy shit. No wonder he's a legend. But it's none of those people. It can't possibly be one of those people. I don't think it was. But I don't think the killer, accidentally stumbled in. I mean, my God. It's like one of those Bugs Bunny cartoons where the snarl, Tasmanian devils and roosters, kitty cats, putty cats, just swarming around this parking lot. And a serial killer snuck in, shot Mike and Darlene, and got the hell out and has never been seen again. That's amazing. Because if you've ever been there, it's kind of in an isolated corner. The town goes like this, and then Blue Rock Springs Park is here. So there's really not a lot else going on there. They haven't finished building the junior college yet, which is 1 mile west on the parkway. There aren't a lot of streets you can turn onto Columbus Parkway when you get out in that area. You're just on the parkway. There's really no turnoff. And it's just a swarm of cars in and out of that parking lot at midnight, which, there was no cell phones. I'll meet you at Blue Rock Springs Park at midnight. That was I remember people were going to meet at midnight all the time. Even when they knew they weren't going to meet at midnight, they were always going to meet at midnight. Always going to meet at midnight. So maybe Hoffman and Andy are involved in something that gets a lot of people shot, including Andy and Hoffman. Okay, how do we know that the first 2 letters were some kind of hoax? Maybe not a prank, but something very serious going on. Trigger warning. You're going to see some bloody autopsy photograph here in a second, okay? Trigger warning. Hide your eyes. You're going to see... Before I do that, let me check I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger. This time I'm going to check the chat first. Hi, channel. Hoffman and Chaney should have done that documentary. Hoffman did Fincher's documentary. Hoffman sat down for an interview where he incriminated himself even worse. I'll go over that in a premium episode. Oh, Jimmy Woods is from your hometown in Jersey? Hi, Baby Will. I know, I'm actually, you know what? I think California was always 21. It might have been 21, going back to the 20s. Maybe they had a law for 3-2 beer, light beer. When I lived there in the 80s, it was 21 for sure. And it was still 18 in Illinois. I could drink in Illinois. I moved to California, couldn't drink. But I looked old enough. I didn't get carded, but I couldn't go to nightclubs. And I went with that one lady I worked with, and we went at all, but it was because of her. So nobody checked my ID. But I didn't have I couldn't go to those clubs. I didn't have ID. I went to California, this liberal, hedonistic state. The drinking age was 21. It was like the only state in the country where the drinking age was 21. 30 minutes to an hour? Jesus Christ, Shane. What's your fucking tolerance? I need... Shane... Fuck the window pane. Shane needs the window pane, the frame, the lattice work. He needs those weights that go up and down the walls. He needs a windowsill about yay wide. You want his eye? You want to get Shane's eyes open in the morning, buddy? You better bring your best. You better bring it. Better bring it. So how do we know that at least those first two, see, more than one person's writing the letters. How do we know those letters were a hoax? Well, the autopsy report and autopsy photographs of poor little Betty Lou Jensen prove, beyond the shadow of any doubt whatsoever, that those letters were a hoax and could not have been written by the killer. As you'll see in the next episode, I'm Professor Thomas Henry Horan, asking you to please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
He reads everything.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. God bless. Take care of yourselves. Watch the debate.